So you and we're about to go on a little adventure together. That adventure is going to span 118 years of Tudors, and it's going to be one generation at a time. How does that sound to you? I'll be your host this evening. My name is Christina. Thank you for joining us here at my Tudor era Tapestry. In the high-ceilinged chamber at Greenwich Palace, where the tapestries of roses and saints glowed in the flickering light of a crackling fire, Eliza sat in a carved oak chair, her hands resting gently over a velvet cushion that eased the growing weight of her 6th pregnancy. At 35, her delicate features bore the quiet scars of 5 prior pregnancies, her body a testament to the Tudor dynasty's hopes and losses. The air held the scent of cedar smoke, and the faint sweetness of lavender from the rushes, a contrast to the court's relentless demands. Elizabeth and Thomas Boleyn's union had brought forth their daughter, Mary, a lively 2-year-old whose bright eyes were a new joy in the Boleyn household, and baby Anne, their presence whispered of fondly by Elizabeth as she served the Queen. Thomas, his ambition evident in his crisp bows and attentive presence near the council chamber, carried messages with a polish honed since his arrival at court in 1497. His Kent roots now entwined with the Howard lineage, bolstering his rise under Eliza's watchful eye. Their babies, Ladies Mary and Anne, would likely one day be ladies-in-waiting themselves, as had their mother and grandmother before them. Maybe to Eliza, maybe to the next queen. Eliza spent hours in the nursery, a paneled haven hung with embroidered cloths of St. George and the Tudor rose, teaching Meg, now 12, to stitch crimson silk roses, their giggles mingling with the sighs of impatience. Arthur, 15, studied nearby. His betrothal to Catherine of Aragon sealed an a proxy marriage that year, a triumph Eliza had nurtured through her diplomacy. In Westminster's Great Hall, its beams draped with red and white roses, she hosted Spanish envoys, her green damask gown shimmering as she offered spiced wine, her serene smile masking the ache of her past losses. Her son Edmund's death in 1500, a stark reminder of the throne's vulnerability. In the palace gardens, the scent of late roses evoked her mother, whose counsel to nurture peace had guided her. The gravel paths lined with yews offered solace as she walked, her hand resting on her belly, thoughts drifting to the child she carried, and the throne Henry had won at Bosworth 16 years prior. Eliza's Yorkist heritage tied her to her father Edward IV and her lost brothers. It was both a struggle and a burden. The executions of Perkin Warbeck and Edward Earl of Warwick in 1499 still lingered. Warbeck's false claim to be her brother Richard a cruel mockery. Edward's death a sacrifice of her cousin's Plantagenet blood. In the chapel, with stained glass casting jeweled light, Eliza knelt before a silver crucifix, her rosary beads slipping through her fingers as she prayed for Maggie. Elizabeth Boleyn, nearby, offered a gentle smile as she lit a candle, each prayer a vow to shield the Tudor legacy from the shadows of grief and rebellion. In the grand hall of Westminster Palace, Princess Mary Tudor, now 5 years old, clutched her mother's hand, her wide eyes drinking in the dazzling arrival of Catherine of Aragon. On November 12, 1501, the Spanish princess, almost 16, in a gown of gold-embroidered silk, entered London amid a cacophony of ringing bells and cheering crowds that lined the cobbled streets, their voices rising like a tidal wave. Catherine's entourage, a blaze of Spanish nobility in jewel-toned velvets and glinting armor, trailed her like a comet's tail, their horses' hoofs clattering on the stones. Mary, with her curls bouncing beneath a tiny velvet cap and her rosy cheeks flushed with excitement, stood beside her mother Eliza, her small frame swathed in a crimson gown stitched with silver thread. Awed by Catherine's grace, Mary saw her future sister-in-law, destined to wed her brother Arthur, as a figure from the chivalric tales her mother spun. A princess whose poise promised to strengthen the Tudor crown. Mary, oblivious to the intricate diplomacy that bonded England to Spain's might, was enchanted by the pageants that transformed London streets. Knights in gleaming armor, astride horses, banners emblazoned with dragons and roses fluttering with the crisp autumn breeze, and the minstrels playing lutes in vibrant processions. Guided by Eliza's gentle hand, Mary shyly offered Catherine a posy of late roses and marigolds, and lisped, "Welcome," barely audible over the crowd's roar, earning a kind smile from the princess, whose eyes sparkled with warmth. As November unfolded, Mary's days were a whirlwind of glimpses into the wedding preparations. Her nurses whisking her through Westminster's stone corridors, where the tapestries of Arthurian legend and banners of Spanish pomegranates and English roses adorned the walls. Court's preparations were orchestrated by Mary's lady grandmother Margaret, whose stern presence loomed over everything. Margaret, at 58, ensured every detail: gowns of cloth of gold, banquets laden with roasted swan and spiced wine, masses sung in St. Paul's with soaring chorals. It was flawless. Her wealth from vast estates funded the entire spectacle. Mary, awed by her grandmother's commanding voice and gabled hood, tiptoed past her in the halls, sensing her authority, but drawn to her rare smiles. The wedding, set for November 14th at St. Paul's Cathedral, was a spectacle that captivated Mary's childish imagination. She stood with her family, her small hand in Eliza's, as Catherine exchanged vows, the cathedral's aisles strewn with roses, and its stained glass glowing in the winter light. The banquet that followed in the great hall overflowed with music. Mary, seated at the high table, nibbled on marzipan shaped like lions, her eyes darting between Catherine's poised grace and Henry's eager attempts to join the revels, his boasts of outdancing the courtiers drawing indulgent laughter from Eliza. The court, draped in splendor, celebrated the Tudor-Spanish alliance, a triumph of Henry's diplomacy to secure his dynasty against rivals like France. Princess Meg stood in the high chamber of Baynard's castle, breath fogging the leaded window as she watched the city pulse with preparations for her brother Arthur's wedding to Catherine. The air carried the scent of polished oak and crushed lavender from her gown, its crimson velvet heavy with gold embroidery, a gift from her mother, Queen Eliza, to mark the occasion. Meg's hair, tamed beneath a jeweled hood, framed a face alight with excitement, her quick wit and bright eyes darting to the banners of red and white roses fluttering below, symbols of the Tudor dynasty her brother's marriage would strengthen. Meg's days had been a whirlwind of courtly splendor, lessons in Latin and dance, interrupted by fittings for the wedding, where she was to walk in the procession, the proud sister to the Prince of Wales. Arthur, now 15, was a solemn figure, his pale face flushed with duty as he prepared to wed the Spanish princess, whose arrival filled London with trumpets and cheers. Meg, who had glimpsed Catherine at a banquet, marveled at her poise, whispering to his sister Mary, 5, that their new sister-in-law seemed a queen already. Her brother Henry, 10, strutted in his own fine doublet, boasting he danced better than Arthur, his boldness drawing Meg's teasing laughter. Yet she sensed her mother's strain, Eliza's serene smile masking grief for Edmund, and unease over the court's vigilance, sharpened by the executions of Perkin Warbeck and her cousin Maggie's brother Edward, Earl of Warwick, 2 years prior. Her emotions danced like the torchlight in St. Paul's Cathedral, where the wedding unfolded a spectacle of Tudor triumph, orchestrated by her lady grandmother, Margaret. Meg processed behind Arthur and Catherine, her steps careful on the stone floor, the scent of incense heavy as the choir sang and the nobles knelt. Arthur, his hands steady as he clasped Catherine's, her white gowns shimmering with pearls. Meg's heart swelled with pride, yet a pang of loneliness struck. Arthur would soon leave for Ludlow with Catherine, his duties as Prince of Wales pulling him far from the nursery games Meg cherished, her childhood slipping away in the cathedral's glow. In the banquet that followed, Meg twirled in a courtly dance, her crimson gown catching light as lords and ladies clapped. The hall was alive with spiced wine and laughter. She stole glances at her parents, Henry, his stern face watching her carefully, and Eliza, beautiful yet weary, her hand resting on Mary's curls. Margaret, in somber silks, watched with hawk-like eyes, her pride in Arthur's union a fortress against the rebellions. Meg, too young to grasp the treaty's weight, felt only the thrill of the moment, her steps faltering only when she thought of Edmund's empty cradle. In her chamber at night, Meg clutched a rose-embroidered ribbon, a gift from Arthur, whispering prayers for his happiness and the family's safety, her heart a spark of joy and sorrow in a court where roses bloomed amid thorns of loss and duty. In the frost-kissed dawn of late November 1501, Margaret Beaufort, Lady of Richmond, stood in the shadowed cloisters of Westminster, her breath a faint mist in the chill air as she watched the flurry of preparations for Prince Arthur's departure in Ludlow. The great hall still echoed with the fading splendor of his wedding to Catherine, a spectacle of velvet and gold that had sealed a Spanish alliance and crowned the Tudor dynasty with promise. At 58, her slight frame, clad in somber black damask, bore the unyielding posture of a woman who had forged a throne from the ashes of war. Her sharp eyes, ever watchful, traced the figures of servants, loading chests and furs and plate onto carts, while her heart, tempered by years of vigilance, stirred with a quiet tumult of pride and dread. Arthur, her grandson, the rose of her ambition, was to take his bride to the Welsh marches, to govern as Prince of Wales and prove the strength of the Tudor name. The wedding, only days past, had been a triumph she had orchestrated with meticulous care. Banquets of swan and venison, minstrels weaving melodies through candlelit halls, and the public bedding ceremony that had drawn blushes from Catherine and laughter from the court. Yet now, as the young couple prepared to leave the warmth of London's palaces for Ludlow's austere castle, Margaret's thoughts churned. Margaret had overseen every detail of their union, from the negotiations with Ferdinand and Isabella to the dowry's glittering arrival, knowing it bound England to a power that could shield her son's crown. But Ludlow, remote and rugged, was a proving ground, a place to test Arthur's mettle and Catherine's resilience, and Margaret felt the familiar pang of a mother sending her child into the world's uncertainties. In the quiet of her privy chamber, where the fire cracked against the cold and the crucifix gleamed above her desk, Margaret knelt in prayer, her rosary beads slipping through her fingers like the moments of her life, each one a plea for Arthur's strength, for Catherine's fertility, and for the dynasty she had birthed through blood and cunning. The court buzzed with whispers of York's threats, of pretenders who still haunted the edges of her son's reign, and she knew Ludlow was both a stage and a shield, placing Arthur beyond the capital's intrigues, yet exposing him to the March's wild borders. She had ensured the castle was fortified, its household staffed with loyal men, and Catherine's Spanish attendants balanced with English ladies to ease her transition. Yet the weight of her own history, the loss of her son's father, and the years of exile and fear pressed against her, a reminder that no plan was infallible. As she rose, her gaze fell on a letter from Elizabeth of York, her daughter-in-law, whose gentle heart fretted for Arthur's youth and Catherine's solitude in a strange land. Margaret's reply was firm, yet kind, urging trust in God's will and the prince's tutors. But her own heart wavered. She thought of her son, King Henry VII, whose cautious rule had steadied the realm but could not quell the restless undercurrents. The Tudor rose, red and white entwined, adorned the banners that would travel with Arthur, a symbol of the unity she had fought to make real. Yet as the carts rumbled out and the young couple's figures faded into the mist, Margaret stood alone, her hands clasped tightly, her faith and fear entwined like thorns around her heart, guiding the fragile hope of dynasty yet to bloom. In the chill of Ludlow's castle's stone-walled chambers, 16-year-old Catherine of Aragon sat in a high-backed chair by a crackling fire, her hair catching the glow, while 11-year-old Maria, her devoted lady-in-waiting, hovered nearby, arranging a sachet of rosemary tucked into Catherine's sapphire silk gown, a gift from her mother-in-law, Queen Eliza, to mark her new life. The air carried the scent of damp wool and herbs in contrast to vibrant courts of Granada. Catherine's poised demeanor masked a heart adjusting to England's gray skies and unfamiliar tongues, her Castilian accent softening as she practiced English with her ladies. Maria's quiet encouragement a steady comfort amid their chatter. Newlywed to Prince Arthur, Catherine's marriage bound her to the Tudor dynasty. Yet Ludlow's remote halls felt a world apart from London's splendor, her husband's shy smiles warming her cautious hope, but Maria's loyal presence a gentle anchor. Catherine's days were a delicate dance of duty and discovery, her mornings spent overseeing her household, Spanish maids like Doña Elvira mingling uneasily with English attendants, while 12-year-old Maria, quick and attentive, helped organize Catherine's belongings with care beyond her years. Afternoons brought lessons in Welsh customs and letters to her parents, Ferdinand and Isabella, assuring them of her health and Arthur's kindness. Maria often nearby, listening as Catherine dictated her thoughts. Arthur, 15, was a studious prince, his pale face often bent over maps or books, his courtesy unwavering as he guided Catherine through Ludlow's windswept courtyards, Maria trailing respectfully behind. Among Arthur's household was 17-year-old Charles Brandon, a lively presence whose calm and confidence as a young courtier occasionally caught Catherine's eye, though his duties kept him at a respectful distance. Their marriage, more a treaty than a romance, was still tender, their shared meals filled with halting conversations about governance and faith. Arthur's gentle questions about Spain drawing Catherine's guarded laughter, with Maria's shy smiles echoing her mistress's warmth. Catherine, raised in the shadow of her mother's consequences, felt the weight of her role as England's future queen. Her prayers in the castle chapel, heavy with incense, seeking strength to unite two crowns and secure the Tudor line. Maria kneeling beside her in quiet solidarity. Her emotions were a tapestry of resolve, homesickness, and quiet pride, her eyes flickering with longing as she gazed at the snow-dusted marshes, so unlike Granada's sunlit halls. Maria, sensing her mistress's mood, offered a small gesture, a shared glance, a gentle touch that eased Catherine's isolation. The Tudor court's warmth helped, yet Catherine sensed the undercurrents of grief, from Edmund's recent death to the executions of Perkin Warbeck and Edward, Earl of Warwick, whose shadow still lingered. Arthur's occasional coughs dismissed his winter chill, stirred a flicker of unease in Catherine, mirrored in Maria's watchful eyes as they both prayed for his strength, their union the cornerstone of her father's alliance. In the firelit hush of her chamber, Catherine penned a letter to his sister Juana, describing Ludlow's stark beauty and Arthur's quiet honor. Maria, quietly preparing ink and quill, her presence embalmed Catherine's veiled loneliness. At vespers, Catherine joined Arthur, their voices blending in Latin rhythms. Maria's soft voice joining in shared faith, bridging their unfamiliarity. Catherine's hand brushing Arthur's as they knelt. The winter of 1502 was a season of becoming, her courage a spark in a court where joy and sorrow intertwined. A chill wind swept through Ludlow Castle, where Maria stood in the stone-walled chamber of the newlyweds, Prince Arthur and Princess Catherine, her heart pounding as she pressed a damp cloth to Catherine's fevered brow. The scented herbs clung to the air, the sweating sickness having struck the young couple with merciless speed in late March, its clammy grip turning their bridal joy into dread. Maria, her young face etched with worry, tended to Catherine with unwavering devotion, her hands steady despite the fear that gripped her heart. Maggie's days at Ludlow had blurred into a rhythm of quiet service, her hands steady despite the weight of the fear that pressed against her chest. She moved through the sick room with practiced care, tending to Catherine, whose fevered brow glistened under the dim light of tallow candles, and Arthur, the young Prince of Wales, whose form seemed to shrink daily beneath the heavy damask coverlet. Her own children remained at Farley, her laughter and squabbles a distant ache in her heart, yet duty bound her here, to this cold stone castle, where the air hung thick with the scent of sickness and wax. The court at Ludlow, though small, was a knot of loyalty and fear, its members whispering prayers in the shadowed corridors, their voices mingling with the creak of floorboards and the distant howl of wind against the battlements. The sickness had descended like a spectre, swift and merciless, to find the hopes pinned on the herbs and fervent rosaries. Maggie knelt down in the castle chapel, her fingers tracing the worn beads of her rosary as she muttered petitions for Arthur and Catherine's recovery. Her prayers were fervent, yet tinged with a Plantagenet quiet rebellion, a heart torn between loyalty to the Tudor crown and the precarious place she'd occupied. By April's first light, a fragile hope stirred. Catherine's fever broke, her Spanish resilience a faint spark in her eyes as she gripped Maggie's head. But Arthur's condition grew graver, his breath shallow, his once bright eyes dulled by the sickness's cruel grip. She spoke of the white rose, its petals unfurling in her memory, hoping to anchor Arthur to life with the weight of their shared blood. Yet his hand grew colder in hers, his chest rising less with each labored breath. On April 2, as dawn bled through the narrow window, Arthur slipped away, his 15 years extinguished like a candle snuffed by an unseen hand. The Prince of Wales, the Tudor dynasty's fragile hope, was gone. The castle fell into heavy silence, the red dragon banners drooping in the courtyard as if mourning their prince. Maggie wept, her tears falling on the linen she'd smoothed over Arthur's still form, her grief a tangled knot of love for the boy she had known since his cradle days and dressed for the future. She remembered him at 5, all golden curls and earnest questions, tugging her skirts to ask about stars. Now his loss carved a hollow in her chest, not just for him, but for the delicate balance his life had represented, a bridge between Yorkist past and Tudor present. The task of notifying Eliza loomed like a storm cloud in the flickering candlelight of her chamber. Maggie sat at a narrow oak table, her quill scratching across the parchment as she forced her trembling hand to form the words, both careful and raw. My dearest Eliza, it is with a heavy heart that I write that our beloved Arthur has been taken by God. His soul now rests in his eternal peace, but the weight of his loss presses upon us all. She paused, her breath catching as she imagined Eliza at Westminster, her gentle cousin whose love for Arthur had been a mother's fierce devotion, her hopes pinned on the boy who carried the Tudor crown's future. Maggie pressed her Plantagenet rose seal into the warm wax, its faint outline a quiet defiance, and entrusted the letter to a rider whose horse's hoofs echoed in the night, bound for the distant court. The days that followed were a haze of mourning and duty. Maggie tended to Catherine, whose recovery was slow, her body frail but her spirit unyielding. She helped the princess sip broth, her hands steady despite the ache in her own heart, and listened as Catherine murmured prayers in Spanish, her voice a thread of resilience in the grief-soaked air. The court moved with muted purpose, preparing Arthur's body for burial, wrapping him in fine linen, anointing him with oils that carried the sharp scent of myrrh. Maggie oversaw the women's work, her voice calm as she directed the placement of rosemary sprigs, though her thoughts drifted to Eliza. She pictured her cousin in the great hall at Westminster, the letter trembling in her hands, her face crumbling as the words sank in. In the tender spring of 1502, Blickling Hall stood resolute. Within the nursery's high walls, where ivy crept through the cracks of leaded windows, Anne Boleyn, a baby of not yet 1, lay swaddled in a cradle of polished oak. Her eyes, wide and curious, flickered like twin coals, catching slanted rays of sunlight that danced across the room, painting fleeting patterns on the tapestried walls. The air carried the faint scent of lavender and warmed milk, mingling with the damp earthiness of the castle's ancient timbers, a quiet symphony of home and history. The household of Thomas and Elizabeth Boleyn moved with a muted rhythm of routine. A shadow clung to their steps. News had swept from Ludlow, swift and merciless as a winter gale. Prince Arthur, the Tudor heir, the fragile hope of a dynasty, was dead. His sudden passing at the age of 15 had left the court reeling, and even here, in the secluded embrace of Blickling, the whispers of servants carried the weight of a nation's grief. They spoke in hushed tones, of the widowed Catherine of Aragon, her Spanish pride cloaked in mourning veils, of King Henry VII, whose stern countenance now bore the deeper lines of a father's loss. The servants' voices dipped lower as they tended to little Anne, their hands deftly folding linens or stirring the fire, unaware that the child they cared for would one day step into the very heart of this shaken court, her name a lightning bolt across history. Elizabeth Boleyn, her face softened by motherhood, yet etched with the quiet strain of her station, sat beside her cradle. Her fingers, adorned with a single silver ring, traced the carved edges of the wood as she rocked the cradle gently, the motion instinctive as her own heartbeat. Her thoughts, however, wandered from the nursery's warmth. The death of the prince was a wound to the kingdom, a crack in the Tudor edifice that her husband Thomas would no doubt ponder in his own calculations. Elizabeth's mind turned to her own children, Mary, already a bright-eyed toddler, and this new baby, Anne, whose delicate features belied a spirit that seemed to pulse even now. In the soft rise and fall of her tiny chest, Elizabeth felt their chill, a premonition she could not name. Anne, oblivious to the weight of the world beyond her cradle, gurgled softly, her small hands grasping at the air as if reaching for the sunbeams that teased her vision. Her dark eyes, already sharp with unformed intensity, followed the play of light and shadow as if deciphering some secret code written in the morning's glow. You can share your thoughts with me at longlivethequeenpodcast@gmail.com. Slide into my DMs on Facebook or Instagram at longlivethequeenpodcast, or join the party on Patreon, where we have extended episodes and bonus content.
Combat, I'm ready for combat. I say I don't want that. What if I do? 'Cause cruelty wins in the movies. I've got 100 thrown out speeches I almost said to you. Easy they come, easy they go. I jump from the train, I ride off alone. I never grew up, it's getting so old. Help me hold on to you. I've been the archer, I've been the prey. Who could ever leave me, darling? But who could stay? Dark side, I search for your dark side. But what if I'm alright, right here? And I cut off my nose just to spite my face, and I hate my reflection for years and years. I wish